And I'm all about kids shaming other kids. Like, I am so down for that.
That needs to
I
be
see
the
your
title.
shame and I raise you a shamer.
You're listening to the Laughing Couple podcast with your hosts, Brittany and Ryan Ostafy. Join them weekly as they discuss topics such as relationships, kids, sex, parenting, all unfiltered and all with a healthy dose of laughter. Please welcome your hosts, Brittany and Ryan Ostafy.
Sunk.
I think it's sunk.
Sunk. We have a very interesting conversation and guest today. We have Amy Lang. How are you?
I'm good.
We are talking about the birds and the bees and the sexy times and all of that awkward shitstorm that comes with it. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell everybody a little bit about you, what you do, what you talk about?
I would love to. So I'm a sexuality and parenting educator, and I did not think when I was, 15 that I was going to grow up and do this work. But then I had a child. So here we are. But my background is that I was a sexual health educator. I was doing birth control, abortion, STI counseling, and I loved it. It was my hobby. I was deeply into that. And I just assumed I was going to be an amazing sex talker when I had kids because I just loved sexuality and sexual health. And then when Milo was about 5, he was getting ready for a bath and he grabbed his penis and he said, "Hey, Mama, did you know?" And I stood there and I thought, please do not tell me it feels good to touch your penis because I've got nothing. And so I poker faced, like we're supposed to do. I poker faced and I said, "What?" And he said, "I can see the veins in there where the blood goes." And I said, "Excellent." Perfect. Get in the bathtub. Great. And that was my little moment where I thought, okay, I'm kind of fucked here. I do not know what I'm doing with this kid. And what should I talk to him about? And, I knew enough to use correct names for private body parts. But then I was like, okay, when do you talk to a kid about sex? Like, how much detail and what do they need to know by when? And what should this be like? And how do I make it normal? And how do I get over myself? So I started doing a bunch of research. And the other part of my background is that I have a master's degree and part of the focus was in adult education. So I kind of started figuring it out for myself and my spouse and my child, obviously. And then I had a brainwave and I thought, oh, hey, I could combine my two favorite things, talking about sex and teaching adults. And so I started Birds and Bees and Kids in 2006. And Milo is now 21 and he is launched being a man child.
Have you figured it out yet?
Yeah.
Near as I can tell, he's living with his darling girlfriend. Rumor has it all is well in that department. So that's where I am and how I ended up doing this kind of funky thing that I do.
I love that. And okay, so before we get in, because I have a boatload of questions, we do this thing called I Love You and You're Annoying. Do you have, I know we briefly talked this about with you, but you can either do one like for your spouse, for your son, or maybe like just in your profession, like you love what you do, but what's really annoying about it? Maybe when you're like talking to someone with a client, or does that make sense?
Oh, totally. You two are hilarious.
Ryan, literally, I guess it's filmed. People watch on the YouTube, on the YouTube.
On the YouTube, wow. That's what I call it.
I had food on my face. Sorry.
It's all right. No judgment. No judgment.
These kids these days with the social medias and the YouTubes and the TikTokas.
It's bananas.
Well, I thought in all fairness, I thought, wait, I could leave that food on your face, but I think you would want to, I would want to know if there's food on my face if I'm on a live podcast.
Genuinely. Okay. Where were we before you started grooming?
Sorry. We were talking about the I love you and you're annoying.
Who do you want to
expose?
Well, yes.
Milo, because he was the worst kid to have as a sex educator. Really? He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't ask any questions. He told me that he would rather talk to strangers than me or his dad about sex.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it was awful. But it made me really good at sneaking the conversations in and bribing and all kinds of things to help him get that information. But yeah. So meanwhile, I have my clients and they're like, oh, my kids tell me everything. They just thank you so much for your work. You changed my life. My parenting around sexuality has been amazing. Thanks to you. My daughter just told me she's going to have sex for the first time and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, lucky you.
Yeah.
Because I got crickets, but
the shoemaker's son.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he is well-adjusted, happy, appears to be doing all things and seems like he's a good kiddo in his relationship. But yeah, could not have been more annoying.
It's probably made you better at your job because you also, like you said, like you're having to get creative with how to speak. Okay.
There's a certain degree of empathy, and now there's a certain degree of sympathy that you have that's real life when it comes to these parents having these conversations, because they are difficult conversations, or could be, right?
Yeah. Okay. So my first thing that I want to talk about, so we have an 8-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And I find that children today are growing up and exposed to things so much earlier than we were because of the internet and just how things are. So these conversations I find are happening a lot sooner, especially because sex education in schools are now being introduced sooner as well. Do you feel like there is a specific age that you would like gently suggest would be a good time to talk to your kids about? And I know that's very hard because it's an umbrella and every kid is different, but like if you were having like an ideal age, like what would you say? And does it change for girls and boys?
So with me, there is no gently suggest. That's not how I roll. And yes, I agree with you that kids are getting way more information sooner than most of us did. And all the research shows that the ideal time to start talking, we start the sex talk from birth, ideally, by using the correct names for private body parts. That's a sex talk. Mm-hmm. Talking about bodies and boundaries and different kinds of families, that's part of sexuality. But getting down to business, reproduction, the P going in the V, that should happen ideally by about age 5. Wow. And young, right? So I get that. I get that. So here's why. So I'm going to ask you to put your rational hat on because I can see your eyes. You're both like,
I lost mine.
Well, here's the thing. We're 3 years late and we've got 1 year to figure this shit out.
It's okay. I gotcha. So here's why it's 5. So first of all, just think about 5-year-olds, right? They are curious. They're open. They've only been on the planet for 5 years. They don't come into these conversations with all the crap that we do, right? I'm assuming y'all have had sex.
At least twice.
At least twice, right?
For sure.
You know, and we have our sexual histories. We're sexual beings. We understand sexuality with whatever we've got, in our heads about it. And we know the good, the bad, the ugly, right? We know all the things. And then we look at our 5-year-old and we think, oh, hell no, right? Mm-hmm. Hell no. You are too young to know all of that. But the reality is that your kiddo doesn't know any of that. And so you have this opportunity to fill them up with healthy, factual, values-based information about sexuality, love, and relationships. So think about it like this. They don't know nothing, right? So when you say usual way, right? Not everybody gets knocked up from penises going in vaginas. Mm-hmm. Always takes a sperm and an egg. The usual way babies get made is the penis goes in the vagina and sperm, egg, yada, yada, yada. And when you do the details of reproduction, it's like, this is how a baby's made. This is how butter is made. It's the same to them. Mm. They're not coming into the conversation knowing about orgasms, pleasure, rape, sexual abuse, right? It's just science to them. And when you capitalize on that, you introduce, like we talk about this in our family, it makes it a lot easier to talk about bodies, consent, boundaries, pleasure, because, 99.99% of the time we're doing sexual things because it feels good.
Yeah, we are.
Heterosexual sex, like there's a whole lot to it. So that's why 5. The other reason is that they're starting kindergarten usually, and they're hanging out with older kids, mm-hmm. and info gets passed down. I had a mom who was a classmate, mom of a classmate of Milo's when they were in the 2nd grade, and she called me and she's like, "Help!" And I'm like, "What's up?" And she said that their daughter they'd had dinner, they're watching TV, and she gets up and she stands in front of the television and says, "I know what sex is." And they were like, "Oh, great. What is it?" And she said, "It's when you kiss with tongues." And the parents said, "Oh, where'd you learn that?" And she said, "Fourth grade girl on the playground." So when you have the conversations, you give your kid accurate fact-based information. And then, if she'd said, what about kissing with tongues, right? And you can have a conversation about sexual behavior. And, it doesn't start with in the middle, right? It starts with hand holding and, other kinds of more non-penetrative behaviors, as we like to say.
Okay. So here's my concern. I don't know if it's a concern. I absolutely agree with what you're saying.
She's taking off her rational head right
hat.
now. Hat. The rational hat is going off.
No, my rational hat is on, and it's still on, but it's curious. So for me, I understand the comparison to being this is how baby's made and this is how butter's made is great because they're just factual things. You're teaching your kids this. I think my fear as a parent comes in this way. Am I introducing something that they perhaps would know nothing about, and I'm planting a seed that maybe wouldn't have been there and it wouldn't have grown? Children are so curious. So I feel like I'm talking to my kid about something, and this is more my 8-year-old over my son would be like, cool. But then he'd be like, can I put mine in someone else's? And we're going to be like, no, we're not doing that. But I think as they get older, it scares me because we have now given them this information, this power. And my fear is that they're going to want to do something with that. And I'm like, well, maybe if we keep them, I know this is irrational, so my hat's off. Maybe if we keep them in this little bubble of only knowing certain things, that they won't be curious about it. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's not off. You threw it away.
I know, but it does freak me out.
No, it's okay. No, it's a really common concern. And let me just help you out here.
Please.
It's really bottom of the list. So when you talk with them, and I've got some books that I recommend that are going to be in the show notes. When you talk with them and read books with them, it's very clear that this is not for kids. Their hearts, their minds, and their bodies are not ready for something like this. It's something, for later in life. I don't ever say for marriage, because that's just not real.
Right.
For, 90% of the universe. And so when you frame it as this is for later in life, it's not for kids. There's lots to learn about it. It's a big, important part of life. And so you really need to be ready for it. Most kids don't give it a try. And if you wait to talk to your kids about sex, then you are absolutely doing them a disservice because kids who are informed about sexuality, who have conversations with their trustworthy caregivers, they're safer from sexual abuse. So because they know this isn't for kids. They know you're talking about, it's not okay for someone to look at or touch your privates. It's not okay for someone for you to touch.
Didn't think about that at all.
Look at or touch someone else's privates. So that is a thing that you should just put at the bottom of your list, because at the end of the day, this is about health and safety.
Yes.
Health and safety. And this is one of the biggest things we do, right? Y'all are married. Yes. I'm guessing you had partners before you got married. I think you've been out in the world, right? And so how unprepared you were, right? Right. And there's no perfect way to do this. And you're not going to get it all in. But if you establish early on, this is how we roll in our family, we talk about this stuff, we're open about it, because we want you to be really ready when the time comes. And I have determined that 28 is the best time to become sexually active.
Right.
But we're not going to get our way. Full brain development, people. Full brain development.
I love that. Okay, so we're late.
We're living,
with Riley.
We're definitely late with Riley. No, we're perfectly positioned to have this conversation after today with Riley.
But would you suggest doing it separately, having a conversation with Riley, and then?
Well, Riley Cooper's 4. We got another year. Another year.
Well, no, it doesn't matter. You can talk. I actually read a book with Milo when he was 4. So two things: you're not too late. It's never too late. If they're 17, then you're kind of screwed. But and they might be.
They might be screwing.
So it depends on your kid, right? Your kid's temperament.
Yeah.
Right. The book I'd recommend is called It's So Amazing. And it is fine to read it with them together. And the 4-year-old, he's going to be all about the parts. Like I think it's page 13 in the book. There's a lineup of naked male and female people. And when Milo was 6 or 5, those books were around, and he and one of his best friends, they came roaring in from outside, flipped open the book, and were like, checking it out. What's happening here? So read it together.
A similar book that I found when I was around that age.
Playboy doesn't count.
Yeah, it was Playboy. I found a stash in my dad's Playboys, and that's how I got introduced to this conversation.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. So if your daughter is a shy person, if she is can't stand her sibling, right? If you're not already reading books together, then you might want to just read it with her. But I wouldn't hide it from him. Because for the lovely thing about a little person is that he will never have a memory of learning, right? He'll just always have known, right? It's just normal for him. And most kids, especially pre-puberty, are pretty good with learning about this. They're curious. They're still fairly open. And, when puberty hits the scene, that's when it kind of gets more real, right? They're starting to have more sexual feelings, crushing, and romance is kind of getting more top of mind. And just to be clear, right? Not every kid is down for this. Not every human being is interested in sex and sexuality or romance, but they have to know.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that, like, educating her is going to help her. It's not protecting her.
It's going to keep her safe, I think. I think that was the one thing that I got really from what you shared that I never considered. I thought keeping her away from the conversation was keeping her safe, but it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Nope. I never thought about the idea of other adults.
And she wouldn't have a baseline to be like, this is right.
I never thought about that.
Wow.
So there's a couple of things that are going on in the world today, and I don't want to get political, and I certainly don't want to get into a conversation where there's a lot of the heaviness around it, but I am curious to hear what your thoughts are as a professional. So we are north of the border, so we're in Canada. This is stuff that we don't necessarily deal with at the same level of what's going on in the US, but we hear a ton of rumbling of stuff that is happening south of the border around teachers having these conversations with students, and it being the appropriate place to introduce this is in the classroom as opposed to in the house. Now, all of your teaching and all of your books are about the parents having these conversations. What are your thoughts on a school board creating an education system around this versus the parents controlling the narrative?
So lucky you to be in Canada. Let's just start there because we are bonkers down here, as you may have noticed. So with regard to sex education at school, it is absolutely essential. And 100% behind it, comprehensive sexuality education that starts in kindergarten and goes all the way through. And people get really worried that somehow their children are going to be hurt by this. And they don't teach penis and vagina in kindergarten at school. They teach boundaries, families, that kind of thing, and maybe different sexual orientations, that kind of stuff. And so I'm a fan of sex education at school because not every parent is capable of doing this. And the curriculum that most school districts use is really good. It is designed to be age appropriate because most of us don't know what that is, right? You just learned what's age appropriate. I'm not making shit up, just FYIs. And so you have the most power and influence over your children in terms of their sexual decision making, their values, and all of that. So you're number one. And you're highly influential for a very long time. By the time they're in high school, their peers end up having about the same influence that you do. But before they get to like eighth, ninth grade, you are it. Like their peers are down here and you are it. So they have sex ed. They learn stuff in sex ed. If you're ahead of the game, like with Milo, he was the head of the game. And he had sex ed in 5th grade. And I, of course, was dying to know how it was going. But I kept my cool for a few days. And I said, so how's the sex ed? And he paused and he said, oh, Mama, you cannot imagine the questions those kids have.
Oh, my God.
And I said, must feel pretty good to be, ahead of the game there. And he said, yep. And then I said, what kinds of questions do they have? And he said, I'm not telling you. Because little torture chamber, annoying. And I love you, whatever we say about that. So I guess my advice is don't worry about the sexuality education. Let your kids have it. Talk about what they're learning. And remember, you have the most power and influence over them. There's this stupid thing going on that somehow teaching sex ed and talking about sexual orientation and gender is grooming children. Like somehow that's grooming them. I think they think it's grooming them to be queer, which that is not a thing. You are, you aren't, right? Like that's not a thing. I find it really frustrating. And this is why I think that every family, if you're capable, should it should be parent-led sex ed. You should be in front of it. And it's not that hard. There are pieces of it that's hard, but if you take the time to take care of yourself regarding this, my book, Birds and Bees and Your Kids, is actually about getting your poop in a group, right? To talk about this. And then my new book, Sex Talks with Tweens, is scripts and tips for talking with kids. So, there are two easy resources. But the more confident and comfortable you are and convicted you are that this is your job and your responsibility, because don't you want your child to be whole, healthy, and happy? As an adult, right? Our end goal is not next week. Although for you two with the ear infection and all that nonsense, you're probably like, tomorrow, can we make it to tomorrow? But the end goal is not next week. It's what do you want for them? Like, what do you hope for them when they start on this kind of legit, real journey of romance, dating, relationships, and getting there, right? Like learning and watching the world and their bodies changing and understanding, that people have different experiences of sexuality, that it doesn't start with parts and wholes, that it's a process, it's a learning process, just like everything else.
I have a question. Okay, it's actually on your Instagram. You do this thing, which I love. This is kind of a two-part. First is praise for you. Second is my question. You do this thing where you let people write in a specific question that has to do with sexuality from their kids or their experience, whatever. And then you allow your audience to give helpful, non-shameful advice. And it's awesome. It really is so cool. But the one was very intriguing for me because I feel like we will run into this if we haven't already. And somebody asked, how do I allow my child to be in a conversation and stand up for somebody who maybe has two parents of the same sex on the playground? Oh, where's your, not even, maybe they're not being bullied. Maybe it's just a question, where's your mom when they have two dads, or and there were so many awesome responses from people, but I feel like I would freeze, and I'd want to be respectful, but I want to know the right answer. How would you suggest approaching our kids with that education? Just give some tips that we could say to our kids. If you overhear this, I would suggest maybe X, Y, and Z.
So just to clarify, so if your child overhears another child saying, where's your dad? Or
something along that line.
Those lines. So, that's bystander training in a lot of ways. How do you teach your child to stand up for somebody else? So one thing I would coach them to say is, you know what? Not everybody has a mom and a dad in their family.
Right.
And just, some people have a single parent. They're being raised by their grandparents. They're being raised by two dads, two moms, so they're different kinds of families. I don't know that a child's going to be able to bystand, an 8-year-old is going to be able to kind of interrupt that assumption. Or if a kid's what, that's weird, right? Why don't you have a dad? Why do you have two dads? With that kind of conversation, if your child feels comfortable and confident enough to say, they're all different kinds of families, weirdo. And I'm all about kids shaming other kids. I am so down for that.
That needs to be
I see
the
your
title.
Shame and I raise you a shamer.
That's the title of this podcast.
Oh my God.
I'm okay with kids shaming kids.
So shamer, here we go. I have a side note about the word shamer.
Yes,
so one of my friends told me that one of her friends who has a penis, his parents called his penis his shamer.
Stop.
I know. Terrible.
Oh my God, that's so sad.
Terrible.
Wow, so let's shame those parents.
If you're going to hear one thing on this podcast, let it be, do not name your penis the shamer.
That's so ridiculous.
Awful. What do you do with that as a human being?
Here's a funny story. I'm gonna play on a scenario with you because it's gonna lead to the conversation that I want to have on this one. My nephew, at a very young age, while on a cruise ship, while his parents were not paying attention to the TV, accidentally turned on the porn station
and bought movie.
Well, he accidentally purchased the porn, and he didn't realize that you could stick your fingers into a woman's vagina. And so he started having these conversations. Here's where this is going. The internet is littered with possibilities for children to stumble upon websites that are inappropriate for their ages. And it takes absolutely nothing to hit, yes, I'm 18.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I've been on these websites and not that I know about them, Brittany, just so you know. But it's very easy for them to access it. Unlike ourselves, when we were younger, we didn't have access to high-speed internet and porn to that same degree. So there's sex and there's porn. How do we have these conversations with our kids about the difference between the two of these? And should we even have these conversations? And I'll tell you this is a true story. One of my daughter's friends talked about someone putting their penis in someone's mouth. We're going to assert that they saw something that they shouldn't have seen, and we didn't really know what to do with that.
Okay. So remember at the top, we did, what is it? I love you.
You're annoying.
And you're annoying. So this is a, I love you and a, please, Jesus, just listen to me and do what I tell you to do.
Okay.
Okay. I'll tell you that in just a minute. So the short version is you have to use monitoring and filtering on every single device your child can access the internet on. It is required. It is like a seatbelt. Would you ever let your kid get in a car without a seatbelt or a car seat or any of that ever? No, right. Never. And you should never let your child on the internet because it is so easy to stumble into porn. So your example of your nephew, just like, oh, that looks like fun. That's a pretty lady. Da, 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 da. I'm 18. What? Who cares? Right.
Yeah.
Happening all the time. I get the terrible stories of this on the regular. And I don't even know what to do. Like, I think people don't believe me that this happens all the time. Kids don't tell. Kids don't tell. Kids rabbit hole. It's fascinating. It's like picking a scab. And so I'm saying this and I'm looking at the two of you. So I'm making some assumptions. This is just so important to their health. And like you said that you found your dad's Playboys, right? I'm all for that. When you see something that is video, it is real to them. They don't understand what they're seeing. One way to talk about it is to say they're actors. Pornography is sex. It's not real sex. People don't say those things, do those things, look like that, make those noises. That is not real sex. Some people compare it to superheroes, which I just think is so weird. Like a superhero is not real, right? Like Wonder Woman, there's no human being like Wonder Woman. And so kind of like that, when you see a woman in porn, there's no woman in real life that does that anyway. So please just eliminate the superhero thing from your minds. So you have to talk to them. And there's a good book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures that talks about pornography in an age appropriate way. If you're not talking with them about it and not telling them that there's scary stuff they can see on the internet, and it's not just that. I mean, you can learn all kinds of awful things. You can see all kinds of awful things that can really hurt a child. And this is something that I wish it was 2007. I wish that we have .sex and that it could just be blocked. I mean, I know they'd work around it, but if you don't talk to your kids about this, you're actually kind of putting them in harm's way. And it's not every kid. And like I said, it happens accidentally. So, if I were 10 and I had the internet, I would have Googled all of the things. Right. I'd
Amy,
start with sex.
This is a true story, and I'm not embarrassed to say this or ashamed to say this. This is a true story because and this is where my fear comes. Even if you block it, when the kids wants to get access to something, they find access to it. Sure. And this is my first job, my first actual non-T4 job, but my first way of generating income is I found my parents had what's called a black box.
Hold on. How old were you?
I was 16.
Okay.
No,
you were
I was
younger.
14.
Yeah, you were younger than that.
They had this illegal cheater box, which allowed us to have access to movies. And movies were the only way to watch porn. There was no internet. And so what I would do every night at 11 o'clock when my parents went to bed is I put the VCR in, I would record a movie. An hour and a half later, I would wake up, I'd put another movie in, I would record that movie, and I'd go to school each day and I would sell 2 pornographic movies for $40 each.
Look at you. How
Hustler.
you're just incredibly innovative. I'm very impressed. Keep going.
Entrepreneurial.
But the reality of it is, and my parents never talked to me about this
Right.
stuff. And so for me, it was supply and demand. I knew that I wanted it. I knew my friends wanted it, and I had access to it. So I gave it to them. Today, it's just so much different.
Yeah.
So I feel like there is a conversation that needs to happen up front to get them to understand that this is something different than what it is that your mom and I do. Mm-hmm. And it is something different that you and your partner will do when the time is right for you to do that. I just don't know. My biggest fear, and I think this goes back to Brittany's thing, and you mentioned the word grooming. Now, grooming can be taken in totally different, out of context, way left over here. I'm going to keep it back to like this kind of conversation about grooming. There's a part of me that doesn't want to introduce an idea to my kid about this thing that they're going to now be more curious about.
Right.
It's all a push-pull, and there's nothing liberal or conservative about grooming. I just want to be very clear about that. Real grooming is consistent. It looks the same way. It's all the same thing. That nonsense about the grooming and the sex ed, that's just bullshit. So get it out of your head. And yeah, you could be introducing an idea, right? But if you frame it as this is adult stuff, it can hurt you. It can be very scary and upsetting. And then you say, and if you're curious about sex, you got me, you got your mom,
Right.
you got your other parent, and hey, here's this pile of books. This is a safe place for you to learn about this. And you cannot control them, but you can control your own environment, right? What did I start with? Monitoring and filtering. And but you can't control other people's families. So your kiddo goes to somebody's house and sex comes up like it does, or they're like, what do boobs look like? What does a penis look like? And they Googler it up. You can't control that, but you can set up your family so that if something like that does happen, they'll tell you, and you can say, hey, you can just let me know if you see anything like this. And this is key. You will not be in trouble. You won't be in trouble. I just need to know to make sure you're safe.
Yeah.
Make sure your friends are safe if a friend shows you. And then one of the things you can do is, well, I highly recommend this, is that when your kid goes to anybody's house that has children, you say, what monitoring and filtering are you using? Not are you, what? And you want a clear answer. You want Bark, Circle, Custodio. We only have them on one iPad and it is so locked down.
I don't know what any of those are.
Yeah, you will. I'm going to send you some. Everybody, look in them show notes, my friends.
Yes.
They're really easy to install devices. They're apps that help you monitor. You can shut things down. You have to know where they're going. You have to know. And the filtering it's like locking it down. The monitoring is watching.
Yes.
Is watching.
I think we're not, like, I feel like we're coming on here and like, we are not doing a job. We're doing a pretty good job, because I'll tell you a couple things. Like, for one, Riley came to us after she had that conversation with her friend. She felt safe enough to be like, listen, my friend said this about a penis going into a mouth. She said it was really inappropriate. That's the word that she used. And I was like, you're right. But also, Riley likes to watch, God, I hate this show. It's called 1, 2, 3, Go. It's like 5-minute crafts on like Kids Tube or whatever. And so our kids watch kids YouTube, and that's monitored. However, 1, 2, 3 Crafts is on YouTube, and she watches this when we are around. So we're beside her, or it's on our TV, whatever we can monitor. However, YouTube does this stupid annoying little thing where it's like, because they have YouTube Shorts now. So a next one will come up, and there has been 2 times this ad came up, and it was an inappropriate girl. She was at the gym. It was very exposed. It was super sexual. And Riley was like, Mom, I saw that. I'm monitoring, and I swiped away. It was inappropriate. Like, she knows already And so those small moments for me, I feel like that's a small tap on the back because, well, it is. I feel like we're on here. We're like, we didn't do
We don't
anything.
suck, Amy. We're good
I know
at
you
what
don't
we do.
suck. I know you don't suck. I know you don't suck. And I don't mean to shame you, but this is one of the things that makes me crazy. And so, yes, so one side note about your kiddo, do not read that book with her siblings. She will not tolerate it.
Right.
So yeah, she's got good intuition. You have talked with her really well and openly, so she knows not to look. And she, like, everybody's wired differently. She's clearly grossed out. 2 thumbs up, right? We want that for now. So yeah, so I don't like to shame people, but I literally do not know what else to do. People don't believe me, and they don't do it. So so y'all are going to promise me that you're going to increase, right? Because they're getting older, right? And kids come to your house.
Can you name some of the software that we can put in?
We'll put it in the show notes.
I know, but I just want to hear.
I'll tell you again.
Hear them one more time.
Yeah. So the one I like the best is called Bark. Okay. And the way it works is, I think you put a thingy on your router, very technical here. And then you need to install it on every device your kid can have access to. Okay. And then the cool thing is that it's an app. And so if you can tell, like, if your kid's online and your kids are young and you're not, like, this isn't necessarily relevant. So you can see where they're going. You can have it very locked down in terms of things that they can search, and they have like bulk, right? No sex, no suicide, no drugs, like everything. And then you can see where they're going. And then that gives you an opportunity to have a conversation. So if they try to search sex, then you're going to get a ping. Sure. Right. You're going to get a ping. You can shut down the interwebs from there. You can run the devices individually, right? So the iPad might have a different setup. You can put timers on things. You can do all kinds of things. So it's easy to use. It takes a minute to install, but this is your kid's health and safety, right? And, for your daughter who she came to you and said mouth, penis and mouth, right? Yeah. Rock on. So you're ahead of the game in a lot of ways. Now we're just going to bump it up.
Yes.
We're going to bump it up. We're going to whoop it up. You're going to bump it up. And sorry about the shaming. I mean, I literally don't know what to do. So I am going to give people homework. I'm going to give people homework on a device that you have access to and you're not at work. Search sex. Just put sex in the search bar and click on the link and then pretend you're 9. Yeah. Like, I can't look at it. And I look at it about once a year because I just want to see what's happening. Sure. And then decide, make a decision from that point. And if you haven't seen pornography online, you need to see it because it's the only, other than that shock value, right? And don't think your kids would never. Yeah. Don't think that. Don't think that.
It's like, let's reiterate. We don't feel like you're shaming us. It's more of a little nudge to be like, you could be doing a little bit more. And I don't feel shamed.
I feel shamed.
I don't.
I'm kidding.
That's
you have a shamer. You have a shamer. Come on.
I do have a shamer.
Yeah.
I'm making some assumptions, but I'm guessing you got a shamer.
Okay. Amy, can you tell us, I know you have a course. It's a 6-week course, right? Can you just pitch that for us? Because I think it would be really helpful for everyone.
Yeah. So it's called The Hive, and it's a 6-week course. We meet every other week. And it's primarily for parents of tweens, and it's to help you get the party started, or if you've stalled out. Lots of folks stall out around, age 9, 10, 11. Mm-hmm. And it's a series of different classes. And the first one is about helping you figure out your values and how you want to have these conversations. Then there's one on pornography, straight up pornography, what kids need to know by when, puberty. I'm not doing them in order. I just have an open Q&A session in the middle. And my goal for parents is for them to leave feeling prepared and maybe even excited. Mm-hmm. Like, when people have gone through this course with me, at the end of it, they're like, okay, I got this. Yeah. I got this. And so I don't know when you're going out here, but my next one's in September. And if you go to my website, birdsandbeesandkids.com, and click on the freebie, then you'll get on my list. And the freebie is 7 steps to have great talks with your kids.
Perfect. So you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you've got your own podcast, couple of books. What's the best way to get a hold of Amy if you are in trouble? By in trouble, I mean, like, you just don't know.
They need
people.
help. Yeah, you need help. I would say to email me because I'm very responsive. It's amy@birdsandbeesandkids.com. And the other thing too is to listen to my podcast. Your podcast listener, listen to my podcast. And it's advice column style. So people call in. It's like the Help Another Parent. That's where a lot of those questions come from. And they ask me questions, and it is soup to nuts.
Right.
Parents of 3-year-olds, parents of 30-year-olds, not really. And it's really where you can get a kind of a broader picture. And I generally don't do theme shows. Sometimes I do. I have theme shows on porn because,
it's porn.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, because everywhere, because it's a problem.
Yes.
So reach out to me directly, and, Instagram, Facebook, it's at Birds, Bees, Kids for both. And, I guess I just want to say that these conversations can be really fun and funny. They can feel good. And if you think about, that end goal, whole, healthy, happy adult, right? Whole, healthy, happy adult. That's the goal. And think about what a huge part of life this is.
Yeah.
I
found that to be very motivating myself. So
yeah, it's inspiring.
Awesome. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and obviously your expertise in this category. We're all very grateful that we had this conversation with you today.
Thank you.
Appreciate
and
it.
thank you for trusting me with your people and your kids, right?
Of course. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are going to take some actions today. I promise you that.
No, not involving the shamer.
No shamers. Right on. Thank you.
Have a good one.
There goes a sight from my soul.